this man Zayd was actually an Arab from the Kalbi tribe, which was a good tribe, and he was unjustly taken as a captive in like they used to raid places and they would take captives, and he was sold into slavery. Right, Haritha, his father, was of the Kalbi tribe there between Syria and Iraq, and then his mother was a Tai from Hatim a-Tai, from the same tribe of Hatim. So he was actually a noble from good birth, but what happens is he lives in this area. Now, this is an incredible event, I think, personally. What happens is Zayd, radiallahu anhu, is growing up here in the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and Haritha, his father, is looking for him, and then finally gets news from some pilgrims because Zayd meets some Kalbis on pilgrim, and he has to tell them because it would be a disservice, even though he's actually very happy where he is. He tells them, and the news gets wind to his father, and he comes with his uncle. And they come and they meet the Prophet ﷺ, and they explain to him what happened. Now here's somebody who was purchased, given to the Prophet by Khadījah, and this is in the Arab situation, really kind of acceptable condition. So he says, let Zayd choose. I'm not going to. They say, we'll ransom him. We'll give you money. See, so they're recognizing, this is an unfortunate situation. We'll pay you for him. The Prophet ﷺ says, we'll let him choose. If he wants to stay with me, then he stays with me. If he wants to go with you, no ransom. And this is part of his justness, the Prophet ﷺ's fairness. So they bring Zayd to the Kaaba, and he meets his father. He recognizes him, his uncle, and he said, the Prophet ﷺ explains to him the situation, and Zayd radiallahu anhu, he says, I would choose no man over this man. Which is amazing because this is his father, who was a good man. He's been spending all this time looking for his son. So, again, this is a clear indication of who the Prophet ﷺ is. Because here's a man in his house, his slave, he's mamluk, and he's choosing to stay with the person that owns him over his freedom. And his father says, وَيْحَكَ يَا Zayd. Think about what you're doing. أَتَخْتَرَ الْعُبُودِيَّةَ عَلَى الْحُرِّيَّةِ. Do you choose to be a slave over freedom? And he says, I've seen things from this man, I can't leave him. So they leave, and at that point, the Prophet ﷺ announces to the Quraysh, Zayd is my son. Right? Zayd ibni. So this is called tabanni in the Jahili, which again is a really significant event. He says, this is my son. Arithuhu wa yarithuni. I inherit him and he inherits me. And from that day forward, in the Jahili period, he's known as Zayd ibn Muhammad, no longer as Zayd ibn Ḥāritha. Right. Now what happens is, he mentions about the drought and these things and the difficulty that Halima has. And then what happens is Quraysh is suffering because of the difficult weather and things. And Abu Talib has his two sons, Ja'far and ʿAlī, who are very significant also later on. And the Prophet ﷺ agrees with Abbas, his uncle, to relieve Abu Talib, because he had a lot of children. So the Prophet took ʿAlī, and ʿAlī is a child now, small boy. And Fadl, who's the mother of Abbas, who's one of the first people, she has always loved the Prophet ﷺ incredibly. They decide to take Ja'far. And so Sayyidina Ali now becomes part of the Prophet ﷺ's household, right? And then Waraqah comes back to the house. And then another important event happens, which is Abu Lahab proposes to the Prophet ﷺ for his two sons, Uthman and Utaybah. And Ruqayya and Kulthum are both betrothed to Abu Lahab's son. Now this is important for a number of reasons. One, there's a recognition in Bani Hashim now that the Prophet ﷺ is a Za'im. Even though he is not somebody who is in any way asking for this position. He's not somebody that's out there, rallying Bani Hashim to take what's theirs, which is the leadership of Quraysh. But they all recognize there's something extraordinary about this person, the sagacity of his intellect, the wisdom that he has, his abilities, the eloquence of speech. Although he spoke very little, when he spoke, everybody recognized that he had an eloquence that was unmatched in Quraysh, despite the fact that he's not speaking poetry. And so Abu Lahab is obviously here trying to get in, right? Because to marry his children to the daughters, in their culture, you're marrying also for social positioning. And so the Prophet ﷺ at this point is really not somebody that looks in terms of his material well-being. He's got some money now because of Khadījah, but he's not a Makhzumi, he's not from the stronger tribes, he's not a Shamsi or an Umawi, he's a Hashmi. And although there's a blood bond here with Abu Lahab, despite that fact, Abu Lahab, I think really, and he indicates this, is looking for some benefit here. And so he marries, the Prophet ﷺ agrees to them, and they become part again of the household. And this will create a problem later on. We'll see that when Abu Lahab becomes such a vehement enemy of this, causes a lot of turmoil for both Ruqayya and Kulthum because of they're married to Utbah and Utaybah, and their fathers become one of the biggest enemies. Now, another event that's really important here is when the Prophet ﷺ is 35 years of age, the Quraysh are going to rebuild the Kaaba. And the Kaaba was, according to their tradition and according to our belief, was built by Ibrahim alayhi salam. But to touch it in any way that was harmful was considered an incredible sacrilege. And so they're actually very worried about doing this. And it's, does he mention about Walid ibn Mughira? Not sure if he did. Yeah, Mughira. Walid ibn Mughira, who's very tough Qurayshi, they're all afraid to lay a hand on the Kaaba. And what happens is a snake is coming out every day when they go to do this. It's a mean-looking snake, and they take it as an omen, we shouldn't be doing this. Right? And then one day a bird comes and takes the snake off. And so they say, okay, now we've got permission. But they're all still really afraid. And Mughira goes up there and he says, Latra'a, don't be worried, to the Kaaba. He said, this is for your benefit. And he takes the first strike. What they do is decide to wait a day and see if Mughira drops dead or not. Right? And in the morning, Mughira's all right, and so they begin the rebuilding of the Kaaba. Now, he mentions also in here now that the Prophet ﷺ, the important note is that at the point where they finish rebuilding the Kaaba, and there's also something he doesn't, I don't think, mention in there, which is really significant, is that the Arabs collected the money for the building of the Kaaba, but it was on a condition that the money had no interest in it. It had no the price of a prostitute, and nothing. There could be no haram. So it's a recognition. They knew that interest was not a good way of making money, and so they were unable to complete the building on the original foundations of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and that's why you have that shadirwan, which completes the foundation. And so when they were arguing about who's going to put the black stone, which is the most sacred stone in the Kaaba, who's going to put that in place, in the cornerstone, they start arguing, and each clan is saying, we're more rightful. So the Taimis want the honor, the Makhzumis want the honor, the Sahlis want everybody wants the honor. So they decide, the first person that comes through the Kaaba, we'll let him decide. And sure enough, the Prophet ﷺ comes in, and they all see the Prophet, and they say, Radayna bil Amin. let Amin decide. So in other words, here's again an indication, because these are the a'yan. And remember, these are older men. The Prophet ﷺ is still a young man. He is not fully, because it was a society based on elders. So these are going to be men in their 50s and 60s who are tribal chieftains. Right? So the fact that the Prophet ﷺ is a young man coming in, he's not fully admitted into this group yet. I mean, they see he's up and coming, right, leader, but he's not really admitted into the group. So that's important to recognize their psychology. But when they see him, Radayna bin Amin, they recognize this, we're all content with this. He lays out the cloth, has each group pick a corner of the cloth, they lift it up, and then he himself places the stone in the Kaaba. Now what happens now is that the Prophet ﷺ begins to have dreams. And this is the beginning of prophecy. He starts having true dreams. And then at the age of 40, when these dreams begin to occur, he is going off to a place, Cave of Ḥirā is just outside of, right, you have the city. Cave of Ḥirā is a mountain. There's a cave at the top of the mountain, which is just outside the city, and you can actually see from the cave, you can see the Kaaba. I don't know if you can anymore because of the building, but yeah, you can see the Kaaba from the cave. So it's really not far outside of the city. The Prophet ﷺ would go to this cave, and according to the tradition, that he would do it for tahannuth. And hence, in Surah Al-Waqiyah, hint means shirk. So hint is like idol. It's shirk. Tahannuth is from tajannub. It means to avoid the idol. So the Prophet ﷺ is going to this place outside Mecca to get away from the idols. And this is the Hanif tradition. And he's doing the ibadah that he was doing, his meditation in the cave, and he has a vision, which is that, I mean, not a vision actually, he sees the angel. So it's actually a clear seeing. The angel comes and tells him to read, and he says, "Ma ana biqari," I don't know how to read. Now it's important because the angel takes him and squeezes him until he thought his sides were going to burst. The ulama say one of the meanings of this is in recognizing the difficulty of the Quran. The Quran is not an easy book. It's literally going to squeeze the nafs, right? It's going to completely take you to a point where your nafs can't bear it anymore. And so he does that 3 times. And each time the Prophet says, "I'm not a qari." And qari, important to note, qari to the Arabs meant somebody who could read. I mean, generally they say reciter. But qari is an interesting word because it means both a reader and a reciter. The Quran is a recitation, it's also a reading. And so the qari, he was not a reciter. He did not recite poetry, the Prophet ﷺ. He was not known as a rawi or a qari, but nor could he read. So it really has a couple of meanings. And then the Prophet ﷺ is told by this angel in the form of a man that he is Jibrīl, and this is prophecy. And the Prophet is in a complete, now he's actually terrified, and partly because he's worried that the Arabs believe that poets were often possessed by jinn, what they call in Greek tradition the muse, right? There's an idea in Greek tradition also that the poets they had a muse on the side of their, like Ta'abbat Sharra was a poet, that had this jinn that was like reciting to him. That was the idea. And so he was actually terrified that this was a jinn. He goes down to Khadījah very significantly. He's shivering because of this experience. And you can imagine this is an incredibly traumatic experience for a human being to go through. And also because in somebody with the Prophet's his absolute balanced nature, is worried that, it's an unbalanced experience, right? It's uncanny. And so there's that element there. So I think we should all recognize that the Prophet ﷺ in this situation is really troubled by this. He goes to Khadījah radiallahu anhu, zammiluni, zammiluni, cover me up, because he's shivering. He's really traumatized by this experience. And then she asks him what happened. And he tells her what happened. Now Khadījah, a couple of things. One, if we recognize that she was aware at a certain point this is going to happen, because she really did have a knowledge that the Prophet ﷺ was going to be a prophet. So she's not, now finally it's making sense. In other words, this really is what she's been waiting for. And she confirms it to him and tells him, reminds him, you take care of the orphan, you look after the widow, you give sadaqah, you give charity to people in need, and you help the oppressed. How could your Lord abandon you? In other words, doing all of these upright things, how could this be an evil experience? Because the evil influences in the world only have access to people that open up venues for them. And you have never left a venue open for them. So how can the jinn, have access to you? And then she says, let's go to Waraqah bin Nawfal. Now this is a really important and significant event also, because one, it teaches us something really important, and that is, when in doubt, go to an expert, right? فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. If you don't know, go ask somebody who has expertise, who's adept at the situation. And so they go to Waraqah bin Nawfal, and Waraqah, this is the Namus. This is the Sharia. This is what came to Musa. And you are a prophet. So he's confirming now. So now he has a confirmation from Khadījah, and he has a confirmation from somebody who's an expert. Somebody, one, the most intimate and close person to him, his own wife, who knows him better than anyone else, human people. And then from Waraqah, who's an expert in the very thing that's happening to him. And so he tells him a few things that are interesting. One, your people are going to they're going to harm you, and they'll chase you out of this city. And this is something the Prophet ﷺ cannot believe, because, not that he can't believe it, but it's something so shocking to him, because he was somebody that never had a bad word for anybody. He'd never done anything to harm these people. He'd always been absolutely upright and just in their city and in their tribe. And so he's deeply shocked by that. And then Waraqah says that he hopes, even though he's an old man about to die, which again is really significant, that because, see, had he lived, what would have people said? What's that? That he taught him. See, had he lived, and this is what the Christians would have said, because they're always trying to find, where did he get this information from? Yeah, absolutely. So they'd say, oh, he had an aide. Waraqah bin Nawfal was with him throughout his mission, teaching him the Bible and you see, it's important. Waraqah dies immediately after this. But he says, and this is a proof he was a Muslim, he says, I would that I would live to be with you, to give you victory on that day. And then he kisses him. And then, so he's had these two assurances now. And then the next revelation, so the first one is Iqra, and then the next revelation is a single letter, right? Noon. And then wal qalami wa ma yasturun. So it's very interesting that the first revelation is Iqra, write, and then the second revelation is Noon, right? Wal qalami wa ma yasturun. I mean, read. So here, the first two revelations are related to how we learn, right? Through reading and writing, right? Transmission of knowledge. And then waduha, there's a period, a break here, and a period. Now, what happens is the worship. The Prophet is commanded in the Quran, فَاسْتَعْ بِمَا تُؤْمَرْ وَأَعْرَضْ عَنِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. He's told in the Quran, do what you're commanded to do, submit to it, and avoid the mushrikeen. In other words, don't fight them, don't do anything, just avoid them. And this verse in the Quran, once the Prophet was at the Kaaba, and he read that verse, and a Bedouin was there, and he went into sajda. And the Arab said, did you change your deen? And he said, La wallahi. He said, by Allah, I didn't change my deen. They said, why did you make sajda? He said, because of the fasaha of those words. The power of those words. He was just so impressed by that. Fasda bima tu'mar. He was so impressed by that it put him into sajda, which again, it's just telling us they really recognize the power of this book. So he's commanded to do that, and he says that the religion's based on ritual purification and prayer. Allahu a'lam. I mean, at this early period of time, even though he's commanded to avoid najasa, rijs, and these type things, there's really they're being taught tawheed during this first period, and obviously they're making dua and these things, but the prayer is given to him later. And so he begins. The first to embrace it, according to our tradition, is Khadījah. And Waraqah, although he's not generally placed amongst these, he definitely believed in the Prophet ﷺ. But from the ʿAlī in the household accepts, and he's only 7 years of age, a small boy. And then Abu Bakr, who's his closest friend from the Taymi clan, he also embraces it, and Zayd, who's still the adopted son of the Prophet because that hasn't been abrogated. And then what happens is some of the others, like Abdu Amr is a very interesting person. He's known as Abdurrahman bin Auf later. The Prophet didn't like the name Abdu Amr, which is like a Jahili name. He gave the name Abdurrahman bin Auf. And he also becomes Muslim, which is important because he's one of these people that are with the Prophet at the very earliest point, these are the people that will be with him throughout his mission. And they're also people that were coming into Islam at a time when there weren't any perks here. There weren't any social benefits, right? This is all at a time when it was actually incredibly difficult to be doing it. So these people are really important, and they'll be important throughout the mission. Now, another person who, Khalid ibn Sa'id is important also. He had a dream in which he sees the Prophet ﷺ. He's about to enter into a pit of fire, and the Prophet ﷺ pulls him away from the fire. In a dream, he's seeing this. And then he goes, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh is known for dream interpretation amongst the Quraysh. And so he goes to him and tells him, I had this dream, explain it to me, and he explains it, he becomes Muslim. And then another person is Abdul Shams, who's known as Uthman ibn Affan, radiallahu anhu, and he on his way back from Syria heard something in the desert telling him that the Prophet Ahmad has come, and he's asking, who's Ahmad? Right, which is something very unusual. And then he becomes a Muslim, right, because he goes, and there's another man, Talha, also, who meets a monk who tells him that it's time for Ahmad to come out. The monk tells him the time has come for Ahmad to come out. And that's the name that the Christians had for the Prophet ﷺ. And so Talha ibn Ubaidillah, he is a Taymi also. Uthman is a Umayyad, is another clan, very powerful. And basically they go to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and he explains. And Uthman submits. He's 34 years old when he becomes Muslim. So he's mature. He's not like a lot of these men who were very young. Zubair ibn Awam was 12 years old when he became Muslim. He just reached puberty. So a lot of them were very young. And then another one is Abdullah bin Mas'ud, who was a confederate of Zuhra, very dark-skinned, very short. He was very small, and he used to watch animals outside Mecca. And the Prophet is with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and they pass by and they ask him for drink, and he says, I can't, I'm taking care of these, which is a sign of amana. Right? Nobody's going to see him giving some drink. It's a sign of amana. He says, I can't, it's a trust, they're not mine. So the Prophet asks for one that doesn't have milk. And so he brings it and he puts his hand on the udder, and the udder fills up. So here's a clear mu'jiza. Ibn Mas'ud sees that and then asks Abu Bakr, what was that? And Abu Bakr explains to him, he becomes a Muslim also. He's very important because he's going to become one of the greatest of the scholars in Islam, right? Abdullah bin Mas'ud. And he eventually goes to Iraq, becomes a teacher in Iraq, and Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, his madhab is based mostly on his position, fatwa. But he really is considered one of the greatest Muslims. And also, it says here, which is true, he's memorizing everything that comes down from the Quran. And he actually says at one point, there's no verse in the Quran that he doesn't know where it was revealed and why it was revealed. Right? So he saw very early on. And unfortunately, he had a mushaf that gets destroyed. It's lost. And they say there would have been an incredible amount of knowledge had we had access to that. And also Sayyidina Ali's mushaf, which went according to the revelation as it was revealed. And then there's a period in which Ya Ayyuhan Muzammil comes down, and also Ya Ayyuhan Mudaththir. And during this time, Khadījah, it's beautiful, is given greetings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, also indicating her incredible rank amongst the women and amongst the men. And then really what's happening here now is there's not a whole lot of hostility yet, although it's starting to get out, the word's getting out. But then something very important happens, which is أَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. Allah commands the Prophet to warn his tribe, right? And this is a command. So now he has to go to his tribe. And what happens here is he calls the people, the Quraysh, to a gathering. Not Quraysh, Bani Hashim. And he tells them that the first time they eat, and then as he's about to talk, Abu Lahab gets them out. And so they all leave. He calls them another time, and again, Abu Lahab, who's really he's not a nice person. I mean, that's the least we could say about him. And his face was like, they called him Abu Lahab because it looked like it was on fire. Subhanallah. But the Prophet ﷺ tells them that, what if I told you there was an army just over the hill about to destroy you? And they said, we'd believe you because you're Al-Amin. No reason why we wouldn't believe you. He said, what if I told you that I was a prophet from Allah, and I have to warn you from this fire, this raging fire? And then Abu Lahab says, Tabban laka. Alihada jama'atana, Tabban laka. Like, which is, may your hand be, lost. Is this what you called us for? And Allah reveals, Tabbat yada abi lahabbin wa tabb, which is another really significant thing, because one, this is very early on, and that's an early surah, and had Abu Lahab become Muslim, right? I mean, this is a clear mu'jiza, because the Quran condemns him to the hellfire, and he doesn't become Muslim, right? Many of these people end up becoming Muslim. He never becomes Muslim. So he's commanded to do that, and then he says, will anybody, help me in this matter? And all of his relatives, I mean, you can imagine this, it's a devastating event, because here the Prophet gathered them all, they've eaten, they ate from a small amount of food that was enough for all of them, and then the Prophet says, will any of you believe in me and help me? They all blank face. Sayyidina Ali stands up, he's a few years old, he's probably now about 10 years old, and he says, I'll be with you and stand by you. And they all start laughing.